Bilionario planned to take everything in the divorce, until his ex walked in holding a baby. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. Adrian Wolfe adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the third time as he sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Pierce & Associates, Manhattan's most ruthless divorce firm. At 41, he commanded boardrooms worth billions, but today his hands betrayed the slightest tremor. The Italian suit that usually made him feel invincible now felt like armor that wasn't quite fitting right. His steel gray eyes, the same shade that had graced countless magazine covers as America's most eligible bachelor before his marriage, now held nothing but cold determination. 6 feet 3 inches of controlled fury, Adrian had spent the last year building walls around his heart, each brick made of betrayal and wounded pride. Mr. Wolfe, his lead attorney Jonathan Pierce, slid a thick manila folder across the polished table. Everything is in order. We've structured the settlement to ensure maximum recovery of assets. The prenup you insisted she sign will protect most of your holdings, but we can still claim, I want everything. Adrian's voice cut through the air like broken glass. His jaw, sharp enough to cut diamonds, tightened as he spoke. The penthouse overlooking Central Park, the house in the Hamptons, the art collection, her jewelry, all of it. She made her choice when she decided to. He couldn't finish the sentence. Even now, a year later, the image burned behind his eyes like acid. The conference room door opened and Adrian's pulse quickened despite himself. He had prepared for this moment, rehearsed his indifference, practiced his cold stare. What he hadn't prepared for was the way his chest would still constrict at the sight of her. Marisol Reed stepped into the room with the same quiet confidence that had first captivated him at a charity gala 5 years ago. At 33, she possessed an ethereal beauty that seemed to defy the harsh fluorescent lighting of the law firm. Her honey-blonde hair fell in gentle waves past her shoulders, framing a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Her skin, pale as moonlight, seemed to glow against her simple black dress, but it was her eyes, those impossibly green eyes that reminded him of spring mornings in his grandmother's garden, that had always been her most devastating feature. She had lost weight. Too much weight. The elegant dress that once would have hugged her curves now hung loosely, and Adrian felt an unwelcome stab of concern pierce through his carefully constructed hatred. But something was different, something that made his prepared speech die in his throat. Marisol wasn't alone. In her arms, she carried a baby, a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket, no more than a few months old. The infant's face was peaceful in sleep, one small fist curled against Marisol's chest. The room fell into a silence so profound that Adrian could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. His eyes, trained to analyze complex financial statements in seconds, now struggled to process what he was seeing. The baby stirred slightly, and Adrian caught a glimpse of the infant's eyes as they fluttered open. They were gray, the exact same steel gray that stared back at him from mirrors every morning. The same eyes that had belonged to his father, his grandfather, and every Wolfman for generations. Jesus Christ. The words escaped him in a whisper. Marisol's attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Diana Chen, cleared her throat. Mr. Wolfe, I believe introductions are in order. This is Mrs. Reed's son, Lucas. He's 4 months old. 4 months. Adrian's mind raced, calculating dates, trying to reconcile timelines with the bitter narrative he'd constructed over the past year. 4 months meant, he's yours, Marisol said quietly, her voice carrying that same melodic quality that used to read him bedtime stories from classic literature when he couldn't sleep after particularly brutal business days. Your son, Adrian. The words hit him like a physical blow. Adrian gripped the edge of the conference table, his knuckles white against the dark wood. The baby, Lucas, made a soft cooing sound, and something deep in Adrian's chest cracked open like ice breaking on a frozen lake. That's impossible. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. The resemblance was unmistakable. The timing. We were separated, not divorced, Marisol continued, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her green eyes. This was before everything fell apart, before you decided I was someone I never was. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He towered over everyone in the room, but for the first time in his adult life he felt small, powerless. The empire he'd built, the fortune he'd amassed, the reputation he'd cultivated, none of it mattered in the face of those tiny gray eyes that mirrored his own. "Why now?" His voice cracked on the words. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Marisol's composure finally wavered. A single tear traced down her cheek as she adjusted the baby in her arms. "Because the last time I tried to tell you something important, you walked away. You decided I was lying before I even spoke." The memory hit him like a sledgehammer. That night a year ago when he'd confronted her about the photograph his mother had shown him. The way Marisol had reached for him, tried to explain, but his pride and fury had built a wall between them before she could speak. He'd been so certain of her betrayal, so consumed by the image of her with another man, that he'd refused to listen to anything she had to say. Lucas opened his eyes fully now, those impossibly familiar gray orbs focusing with the serious intensity that Adrian recognized from his own baby pictures. The child looked at him with such direct, innocent curiosity that Adrian felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "He has your stubborn chin too," Marisol whispered, and there was something in her voice, not accusation, not anger, but a bone-deep sadness that cut deeper than any weapon. Adrian sank back into his chair, his entire worldview shifting like tectonic plates. Everything he'd believed for the past year, every sleepless night spent nursing his wounded pride, every bitter moment he'd spent planning this exact confrontation, all of it was built on a foundation that was now cracking beneath the weight of a truth he'd never considered. He had a son he'd never held, never fed, never sung to sleep. 4 months of first smiles, first laughs, first everything, gone. Stolen not by Marisol's deception, but by his own stubborn refusal to listen to the woman he'd once promised to trust above all others. The baby made another soft sound, and Adrian's heart, which he'd thought was permanently frozen, began to thaw in ways that terrified him. Looking at Marisol holding their child, Adrian realized he was about to face the most important negotiation of his life, and this time, everything he'd thought he knew about winning and losing was about to change. Would you have been able to forgive someone who refused to trust you when it mattered most? The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the soft sounds of baby Lucas shifting in Marisol's arms. Adrian's world had tilted off its axis, and he was struggling to find his footing in this new reality, where everything he'd believed for the past year was crumbling into dust. Jonathan Pierce, sensing the seismic shift in the room's dynamic, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to allow both parties to—" "No." Adrian's voice was hoarse, barely recognizable to his own ears. His gray eyes remained fixed on the child, on his son, as if looking away might make this all disappear. "I need to understand. I need to know everything." Marisol shifted Lucas to her other arm with practiced ease, the motion so natural it reminded Adrian of all the months he'd missed. Her green eyes met his across the polished conference table, and he saw a flash of the woman who used to trace patterns on his chest while they talked about their future together. "There's not much to understand, Adrian," she said, her voice carrying that maddening calm that had always both soothed and frustrated him. "You made your assumptions. You believed what you wanted to believe, and you never gave me the chance to tell you the truth." "The photograph," Adrian began, but Marisol cut him off with a bitter laugh that didn't suit her at all. "The photograph of me hugging my friend Marcus. The one your mother showed you." Her voice gained strength, the fire he'd fallen in love with beginning to flicker back to life. "Did you know Marcus is gay, Adrian? Did you know he'd just told his conservative family about his sexuality, and I was the first person he called because he needed someone who wouldn't judge him?" Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. Marcus. He remembered now. Marisol had mentioned him before, a childhood friend she'd grown up with in Oregon, someone she'd lost touch with until he reached out because he needed support. Marisol continued, her free hand unconsciously stroking Lucas's back as she spoke. "And yes, we hugged. Yes, he cried on my shoulder. But what your mother's photographer didn't capture was me telling him about the pregnancy test I'd taken that morning." The words hit Adrian like physical blows. He gripped the edge of the table harder, his knuckles turning white. "You were going to tell me that night." It wasn't a question. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. That night when he'd confronted her, when he'd stormed into their penthouse armed with accusations and wounded pride, She'd been planning to share the most important news of their lives. I had it all planned. Marisol's voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. Dinner reservations at Maria, the place where you proposed. I was going to wait until dessert and then... She shrugged helplessly. But you came home early. You came home angry. Adrian closed his eyes, remembering that night with crystal clear detail. How beautiful she'd looked in the emerald dress he'd bought her for their anniversary. How her face had lit up when she saw him walk through the door, until she'd seen his expression. How she'd reached for him, saying his name like a prayer, and he'd pulled away like her touch burned. I tried to explain, Marisol whispered. Do you remember? I kept saying I had something important to tell you, something wonderful, but you wouldn't listen. You'd already convicted me in your mind. Lucas stirred in her arms, making soft baby sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence of the conference room. Without thinking, Adrian leaned forward slightly, drawn by some primal instinct toward his son. He looks like you did as a baby, Marisol said, noticing Adrian's movement. Your mother showed me pictures once, remember? At Christmas dinner 2 years ago. The same serious expression, like he's trying to figure out the world. The mention of his mother made Adrian's jaw tighten. Eleanor Wolfe, with her impeccable breeding and razor-sharp instincts for protecting the family fortune. The woman who had raised him to be suspicious of everyone's motives, especially when it came to the Wolfe money. She knew, he said suddenly, the realization hitting him like ice water. My mother knew about the baby. Marisol's silence was answer enough. Jesus Christ. Adrian ran his hands through his dark hair, the perfectly styled locks falling across his forehead. She knew, and she still let me go through with this. She let me come here thinking I was trying to take half your fortune? Marisol's voice was steady, but Adrian could see the hurt flickering in her green eyes. Your mother made it very clear what she thought of me from the beginning. A small-town girl who got lucky enough to catch a billionaire's attention. Adrian's chest tightened with rage, not at Marisol, but at himself, at his mother, at the entire ugly situation he'd created through his own stubborn pride. Eleanor had orchestrated this perfectly, feeding his insecurities and jealousy until he'd destroyed his own marriage. Why didn't you fight back? He asked desperately. When I filed for separation, when I froze the accounts, when I had my lawyers send those papers, why didn't you tell me about Lucas? Marisol looked down at their son, her expression softening in a way that made Adrian's heart clench. Because I realized something that night you accused me of cheating. I realized that the man I married, the man I thought I knew, didn't actually trust me, and I couldn't raise a child with someone who could look at me and see a stranger. The words were delivered without malice, but they cut deeper than any scream or accusation could have. Adrian had spent the last year painting Marisol as the villain in their story, but sitting here now, looking at the woman who'd carried his child alone through 9 months of pregnancy, who'd given birth without him there to hold her hand, who'd spent 4 months raising their son as a single mother because of his wounded ego, he was beginning to understand who the real villain was. Lucas chose that moment to open his eyes fully, those startling gray orbs that were so familiar yet so new. The baby looked directly at Adrian with that intense, curious gaze that seemed far too wise for someone so small. Can I? Adrian's voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. Can I hold him? Marisol's expression flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, or fear. For a long moment she just studied Adrian's face as if trying to decide whether she could trust him with the most precious thing in her world. Finally, she stood and walked around the table with careful, measured steps. Adrian's breath caught as she approached. The familiar scent of her perfume, something soft and floral that had always reminded him of spring rain, filling his senses. Support his head, she whispered, leaning close enough that Adrian could see the faint freckles across her nose that makeup couldn't quite hide. He's still so little. Their hands brushed as she transferred Lucas into Adrian's arms, and the contact sent electricity shooting up his spine. But all of that faded to nothing the moment he felt his son's weight settle against his chest. Lucas was warm and impossibly small, fitting perfectly in the crook of Adrian's arm like he belonged there. The baby studied his father's face with that serious expression Marisol had mentioned, and Adrian felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen for an entire year. Hello, Lucas, he whispered, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't name. I'm your dad, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. The baby's tiny hand emerged from the blanket, fingers curling around Adrian's finger with surprising strength. The simple contact broke something fundamental inside Adrian. and he had to blink back tears he hadn't shed since his own father's funeral. "He's perfect," Adrian breathed, looking up at Marisol with wonder. "He's absolutely perfect." But when their eyes met, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. There was no joy in Marisol's expression, no shared wonder at this moment. Instead, there was a sadness so deep, it seemed to reach her soul. "Adrian," she said softly, "holding him doesn't change what happened between us." Adrian's world crystallized around the weight of his son in his arms and the devastating finality in Marisol's voice. Lucas gurgled softly, oblivious to the tension crackling between his parents like electricity before a storm. Those tiny fingers still gripped Adrian's index finger with surprising strength, but Marisol's words had created a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. "I know it doesn't," Adrian said quietly, his voice thick with regret. He couldn't look away from Lucas's face, the perfect curve of his nose, the way his dark eyelashes cast shadows on his pale cheeks. "But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Marisol's laugh was hollow, devoid of the musical quality that used to fill their penthouse with warmth. "Love without trust isn't love, Adrian. It's possession, and I refuse to be possessed anymore." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He had been possessive, hadn't he? So terrified of losing her that he'd driven her away with his suspicion and jealousy. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to protect what was his, he'd destroyed everything that mattered. Diana Walsh, Marisol's attorney, cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should discuss the practical matters at hand. Mrs. Reed is seeking joint custody arrangements and reasonable child support." "No." The word exploded from Adrian's lips before he could stop it. Both lawyers and Marisol stared at him in shock. "I mean, not joint custody. I want full involvement. I want to be there every day. I want to make up for lost time." Marisol's green eyes flashed with something dangerous. "You think you can just waltz back into our lives because you finally know the truth? You think holding Lucas for 5 minutes erases a year of abandonment? That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Adrian?" Marisol's composure was finally cracking, and the fire beneath her calm exterior was beginning to show. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to renegotiate terms that you forfeited when you chose to believe a photograph over your wife's word." Adrian felt Lucas shift in his arms and instinctively adjusted his hold, the motion coming more naturally than he'd expected. "I was wrong. God, Marisol, I was so completely, devastatingly wrong. But I can't undo the past year. All I can do is try to be better going forward." "Better?" Marisol's voice rose slightly and Lucas made a small sound of protest. She immediately lowered her tone, but the intensity remained. "Do you know what better would have been? Better would have been trusting the woman you claim to love. Better would have been asking questions instead of making assumptions. Better would have been being there when I found out I was pregnant, scared and alone because my husband had decided I was a stranger." Each word was like a knife to Adrian's chest. He pictured her taking that pregnancy test alone, probably in the bathroom of their penthouse while he was at the office, nursing his wounded pride and planning their separation. He imagined her sitting on their bed, the bed where they'd made plans and promises, holding that positive test and realizing she couldn't share the news with the one person who should have been overjoyed. "I was there for every ultrasound appointment," Marisol continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Every doctor's visit, every sleepless night when I was too anxious to rest. I felt him kick for the first time while I was sitting in a lawyer's office, signing papers that legally separated me from the only man I'd ever loved. Do you have any idea what that was like?" Adrian closed his eyes, Lucas's warmth against his chest a bittersweet reminder of everything he'd missed. "No, I can't imagine, but I want to understand. I want you to tell me everything." "Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why does it matter now? Why should I relive the worst year of my life for someone who couldn't be bothered to fight for our marriage when it mattered?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Adrian opened his eyes and looked at Marisol, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd walked into the conference room. The woman he'd married had been vibrant, full of laughter and dreams. This woman was still beautiful, still strong, but there was a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a guardedness that he'd put there. "Because I was a coward," he admitted, the words scraping his throat raw. "Because I was so terrified of being played for a fool like my father was that I became the fool instead. Because my mother spent my entire childhood telling me that women would only want me for my money, and when I thought you'd proven her right, it was easier to believe her than to trust what we had." Lucas made another soft sound, and Adrian looked down to see those serious gray eyes studying his face. There was something in his son's expression, a gravity that seemed impossible for someone so young, that reminded Adrian of his own childhood photographs. The pictures where he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world, even as a toddler. Your mother. Marisol's voice was flat, emotionless. She knew about Lucas when she came to see you last week. Adrian's head snapped up. She came to see me last week? What are you talking about? For the first time since entering the room, Marisol looked uncertain. She didn't tell you? Eleanor came to my apartment 3 days ago. She offered me money, a substantial amount, to disappear, to move across the country and never contact you again. The revelation hit Adrian like ice water. His mother had known about Lucas for days, possibly longer, and she'd tried to pay Marisol to vanish with his son. The woman who'd raised him, who'd shaped his worldview and his fears, had been willing to steal his child from him to protect what she saw as the family's interests. How much? The question came out strangled. 5 million. Marisol's voice was steady, but Adrian could see the hurt flickering in her green eyes. She said it was enough for me to start over somewhere else, to give Lucas a good life without the complications of the Wolf family drama. Adrian's hands shook with rage, and Lucas seemed to sense his agitation, making a small fussing sound. Immediately, Adrian forced himself to calm down, running a gentle hand over his son's back in a motion that felt instinctively right. What did you tell her? He asked, though he was afraid of the answer. I told her that Lucas wasn't for sale, that he had a right to know his father, even if his father was too stubborn to know him. Marisol's voice grew stronger. And then I told her that if she ever came near my son again, I'd make sure every society page in New York knew exactly what Eleanor Wolf thought of her only grandchild. Pride swelled in Adrian's chest alongside the rage. Even after everything he'd put her through, Marisol had protected their son's right to know him. She could have taken the money and disappeared, could have raised Lucas somewhere Adrian would never find them, but she'd chosen to fight instead. She's not going to be a part of Lucas's life, Adrian said firmly. My mother forfeited any right to a relationship with my son the moment she tried to buy you off. That's not your decision to make alone anymore, Marisol said quietly. Lucas has 2 parents, Adrian. 2 parents who need to figure out how to coexist for his sake, even if we can't be together. The words cut deep because they confirmed what Adrian had been dreading, that holding his son, feeling that instant connection, understanding the magnitude of his mistakes, none of it was enough to undo the damage he'd caused. Marisol was willing to let him be Lucas's father, but she wasn't willing to be his wife again. Can't we try? The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and desperate. Can't we try to find our way back to each other? For Lucas? Marisol was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes fixed on their son's face as he dozed in Adrian's arms. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I spent 9 months hoping you'd call, hoping you'd realize your mistake and come home. I used to dream that you'd walk into the delivery room at the last second, that you'd be there when our son took his first breath. She looked up, and Adrian saw tears gathering in her eyes. But you never came, and I learned that I was stronger than I thought, and that Lucas and I could build a life without you. The finality in her voice was devastating. Adrian felt like he was watching his entire future crumble, and the only thing anchoring him to sanity was the warm weight of his son against his chest. Marisol, please. No, Adrian. She stood up, her movements graceful despite the emotion in her voice. You made your choice a year ago when you decided to listen to everyone except your wife. I've made mine now. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Adrian felt his world narrow to the sound of Lucas's soft breathing and the devastating finality in Marisol's voice. She reached for their son, and every instinct in Adrian's body screamed at him to pull away, to hold on to this moment, this connection, for just a little longer. Wait, he said desperately, but his arms were already moving, transferring Lucas back to Marisol's embrace. The loss of his son's warmth felt like losing a piece of himself. Please, just give me a chance to prove that I can be different. Marisol's expression softened marginally as she settled Lucas against her shoulder, but her resolve remained unshaken. You had 3 years of marriage to prove that, Adrian. You had a year of separation to figure it out. I can't keep waiting for you to become the man I thought I married. Jonathan Pierce shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Perhaps we should focus on establishing a visitation schedule. Mr. Wolf clearly wants to be involved in his son's life. Visitation? Adrian's voice cracked on the word. The thought of seeing his son on scheduled weekends, of being reduced to an appointment in Lucas's life, was unbearable. No, I won't be a part-time father who shows up for birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Then what are you suggesting? Diana Chen asked sharply. Because my client has been raising this child alone for 4 months while your client was planning to strip her of everything she owned. The accusation hit its mark. Adrian ran his hands through his hair, the perfectly styled locks now disheveled and falling across his forehead. I know how this looks. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to earn it. Marisol adjusted Lucas in her arms, and Adrian caught a glimpse of something that made his chest tighten with fresh guilt. There was a faint scar on her left hand that hadn't been there before, a thin white line across her knuckles that spoke of some accident or injury he hadn't been there to prevent or comfort. What happened to your hand? He asked quietly. Marisol glanced down, seeming surprised by the question. It's nothing. I cut it on a broken glass when Lucas was about 6 weeks old. I was exhausted, not paying attention. The image formed in Adrian's mind unbidden. Marisol alone in her apartment, probably trying to do too many things at once while caring for a newborn. Blood from the cut mixing with tears of exhaustion and frustration. He should have been there. He should have been the one getting up in the middle of the night, the one catching the glass before it fell, the one taking care of both of them. You were alone, he said, and it wasn't a question. I've been alone for over a year, Adrian. I got used to it. The matter-of-fact way she said it was more devastating than any accusation could have been. Lucas stirred against her shoulder, making soft sounds that seemed to indicate he was getting hungry. Marisol glanced at the clock on the conference room wall, and Adrian saw the subtle shift in her posture that meant she was preparing to leave. Don't go, he said quickly. Not yet. There's something else I need to tell you. Marisol paused, wariness flickering in her green eyes. What? Adrian took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to reveal would either help his cause or destroy any remaining hope he had. The company, Wolf Investments. I've been thinking about selling it. The statement sent shockwaves through the room. Jonathan Pierce nearly choked on his coffee, and even Diana Chen looked surprised. But it was Marisol's reaction that mattered most to Adrian, the way her eyes widened slightly, the quick intake of breath that told him she understood the magnitude of what he was saying. You're lying, she said flatly. That company is your life. It's everything your father built, everything you've worked for. No, Adrian said, his voice gaining strength. It was everything my father wanted me to be. It was everything my mother taught me to value. But it's not everything I want to be. He stood up, moving around the table until he was closer to her, though he kept a respectful distance. The past year, I threw myself into work because it was easier than facing what I'd lost. I made more money than I've ever made, closed deals that should have felt like victories, and every single success felt hollow because you weren't there to share it with. Marisol's composure was wavering. Adrian, I've been thinking about it for months, he continued. What's the point of building an empire if there's no one you want to share it with? What's the point of having everything if you've lost the only thing that actually mattered? And what? Marisol's voice was barely above a whisper. You think selling your company will magically fix what's broken between us? You think grand gestures can replace trust? No, Adrian admitted, but I think it's a start. I think it shows that my priorities have changed. That losing you changed me in ways I didn't even realize until now. Lucas made a more insistent sound, and Marisol automatically began swaying slightly, a motion so natural, it spoke of countless nights spent soothing their son to sleep. He needs to eat, she said softly, and I need to think about all of this. Where are you staying? Adrian asked. I know you're not at the penthouse anymore. A small apartment in Brooklyn Heights? The admission seemed to cost her something. It's not much, but it has a view of the water, and Lucas seems to like watching the light on the waves. Adrian's heart clenched. The woman who had once lived in a multi-million-dollar penthouse overlooking Central Park was now raising their son in a modest Brooklyn apartment, and it was his fault. His pride and stubbornness had reduced her world to a fraction of what it had been. I could help, he started, but Marisol cut him off. I don't want your money, Adrian. I never did. Her voice was firm but not unkind. I have a job. I'm a freelance graphic designer now, working mostly with small businesses. It's not glamorous, but it's mine, and I can do it from home while taking care of Lucas. The revelation that she'd built an entirely new career while raising their son alone was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Adrian remembered how talented she was, how she used to show him designs she was working on for fun, never thinking of it as more than a hobby because she hadn't needed to work. You always were brilliant at that, he said quietly. I remember the logo you designed for the charity gala we attended 3 years ago. The organizers were blown away. A ghost of a smile flickered across Marisol's face before disappearing. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Adrian said, his voice raw with honesty. The way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. How you always order your coffee with an extra shot of vanilla. The face you make when you're trying not to laugh at something inappropriate. The way you used to curl up against me on Sunday mornings and plan our entire future in sleepy whispers. Marisol's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Those people don't exist anymore, Adrian. The woman who believed in fairy tale endings died the night you accused me of cheating. The man who used to trace my freckles and call them constellations disappeared the moment you chose to trust a photograph over your wife's word. Then let me show you who I am now, Adrian pleaded. Let me prove that I can be the man you deserve, the father Lucas deserves. How? The single word carried the weight of a year's worth of pain and disappointment. However you'll let me, Adrian said simply. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. Marisol was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes studying his face as if trying to see past the successful businessman to the man underneath. Lucas chose that moment to make a sound that was unmistakably a cry for food, and the spell was broken. I have to go, Marisol said, but there was something different in her voice. A crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. Can I see him again? Adrian asked desperately. Can I see you both again? Marisol hesitated at the conference room door, Lucas fussing more insistently in her arms. There's a coffee shop in Brooklyn Heights called The Daily Grind. I take Lucas there sometimes in the afternoons. Tomorrow at 3. It wasn't a promise, barely even an invitation, but it was more hope than Adrian had dared to expect. I'll be there, he said. Marisol nodded once, then walked out of the conference room, taking with her all the light and warmth that Adrian had been missing for the past year. He stood in the sudden silence, surrounded by lawyers and legal documents that no longer seemed to matter, and realized that everything he thought he'd been fighting for had just walked out the door. The only question now was whether he was strong enough to fight for what actually mattered. The Daily Grind was nothing like the upscale Manhattan cafes Adrian was accustomed to. Tucked into a converted brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, it had mismatched furniture, local art covering the exposed brick walls, and the kind of warm, lived-in atmosphere that money couldn't buy. Adrian arrived 20 minutes early, his usual punctuality amplified by nerves he hadn't felt since his first board presentation 15 years ago. He'd chosen his outfit carefully, dark jeans instead of his usual tailored suits, a simple gray sweater that Marisol had bought him for their second anniversary, and no tie. The goal was to look approachable, human, like the man she'd fallen in love with rather than the corporate shark he'd become. He'd even left his Rolex at home, wearing instead an old Timex that had belonged to his father. The barista, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, looked at him with barely concealed amusement as he ordered his third espresso in 20 minutes. Adrian was usually the picture of calm control, but today his hands were shaking slightly as he checked his phone for the dozenth time. 2:47 p.m. She wasn't late, but each minute felt like an hour. At exactly 3 o'clock, Adrian heard the soft chime of the door opening, and his entire world shifted. Marisol stepped inside, Lucas strapped to her chest in a baby carrier, and Adrian felt his heart stop. She was wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without the formal attire from yesterday's meeting, she looked younger, more like the woman he'd married. Their eyes met across the small cafe, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Lucas made a happy, gurgling sound, as if recognizing his father, and the spell was broken. You came, Adrian said as she approached his table, standing immediately to pull out a chair for her. I said I would. Marisol's voice was cautious, but not cold. She settled into the chair, adjusting Lucas in his carrier so Adrian could see him clearly. Though I'll admit I wasn't sure you'd actually be here. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The words came out with an intensity that surprised them both. Adrian sat down across from her, his eyes immediately drawn to Lucas, who was awake and alert, those serious gray eyes taking in his surroundings with the same focus Adrian brought to board meetings. He's grown, Adrian observed, though it had only been a day since he'd last seen his son. Even since yesterday, he seems more aware, Marisol finished. The pediatrician says he's developing ahead of schedule. Too smart for his own good, just like his father. The casual reference to their shared DNA, to Adrian's place in Lucas's life, sent warmth spreading through his chest. What else is he doing? I mean, what should I know about him? For the first time since she'd sat down, Marisol's expression softened. He loves music. Classical, specifically. I play Bach while I work, and he'll sit contentedly for hours. He hates loud noises but loves being outside. We walk along the promenade every morning. He's starting to smile, real smiles, not just gas. Her voice grew tender. And he has this way of looking at people like he's trying to figure out their secrets. Adrian studied his son's face, noting the way Lucas seemed to be doing exactly that, examining him with an intensity that was both flattering and unnerving. He gets that from you. You always could see right through people, except when it mattered most, Marisol said quietly, and Adrian knew she was referring to his mother's manipulation, to his own inability to trust what he should have known in his heart was true. Before Adrian could respond, Lucas made a sound, not crying, but a sort of conversational babble that seemed directed at his father. Without thinking, Adrian leaned forward, his voice automatically dropping to the gentle tone people use with babies. "Hello there, Lucas. Remember me from yesterday?" he said softly. "I know I missed your first 4 months, but I'm hoping we can make up for lost time." To Adrian's amazement and delight, Lucas's face scrunched up in what could only be described as a smile, lopsided and gummy, but unmistakably joyful. The sight hit Adrian like a physical blow and he had to blink back sudden tears. "He likes you," Marisol observed, and there was something in her voice. Surprise, maybe, or cautious hope. "The feeling is entirely mutual," Adrian managed, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Marisol, he's incredible. How did we make something so perfect?" "We had help," she said dryly, but Adrian caught the ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both watching Lucas explore his new environment with wide, curious eyes. The normalcy of it, sitting in a cafe watching their baby together, felt both natural and surreal after everything that had happened between them. "I spoke to my lawyers this morning," Adrian said eventually. "I'm withdrawing the divorce petition. All of it. The asset division, everything. I want to start over." Marisol's head snapped up, her green eyes sharp with wariness. "Adrian, not with us," he clarified quickly, though the words cost him. "I know I don't have the right to ask for that, but legally I want a clean slate. No battles over money or property. I want to focus on what matters, which is learning how to be Lucas's father, earning your trust back, proving that I can be the man you thought you were marrying." Adrian paused, then added quietly, "Proving it to myself too." Marisol was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Lucas's back as she considered his words. "You really meant it, didn't you? About selling the company. I've already put out feelers to potential buyers. Goldman Sachs is interested and there are 3 private equity firms circling. I should have offers within the month." "Why?" The question was barely above a whisper. Adrian looked at Lucas, then back at Marisol. "Because that company was built on my father's vision of success and my mother's fear of not having enough. But when I hold him," he gestured toward their son, "when I see what I almost lost forever, I realize their definition of success was all wrong." "And what's your definition?" "Being there," Adrian said simply. "Being present, being someone Lucas can be proud of, not because of what I own or how much I'm worth, but because of who I am when it matters." Marisol's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. "You can't just reinvent yourself overnight, Adrian. People don't change that fundamentally. You did," he pointed out gently. "The woman I married was brilliant but dependent on me financially. Look at you now. You've built a career, raised our son, created an entire life without needing anyone. You changed because you had to. That's different. I changed because I had no choice. Maybe that's exactly what I needed too," Adrian said. "To lose everything that I thought mattered so I could figure out what actually does." Lucas chose that moment to make another happy sound, his tiny hands waving in the air as if he was conducting an invisible orchestra. Both his parents laughed despite the tension between them, and for a moment, Adrian caught a glimpse of what they could have been, what they still might be. "There's something else," Marisol said hesitantly. "Something I need to tell you." Adrian's stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Your mother came to see me again. This morning, before I came here." Marisol's voice was steady, but Adrian could see the tension in her shoulders. "She had papers with her. Legal documents." "What kind of documents?" "A custody petition. She's trying to file for grandparents' rights, claiming that I'm an unfit mother, and that Lucas should be placed in her care while you and I sort out our issues." The words hit Adrian like ice water. His mother wasn't just trying to manipulate the situation. She was trying to steal his son entirely. The woman who had raised him to distrust everyone was now going to extraordinary lengths to control his life, even if it meant destroying any chance he had of rebuilding his family. She can't do that, Adrian said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew Eleanor Wolfe had the money and connections to make anyone's life miserable through the legal system. She can try, and she will, unless... Marisol trailed off, looking uncertain. Unless what? Marisol took a deep breath and Adrian saw her steel herself for whatever she was about to say. Unless we present a united front. Unless we give her a reason to believe that we're working together in Lucas's best interests. The implication hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. The words hung between them like a lifeline neither was sure they could trust. Adrian stared at Marisol, trying to process what she was suggesting, while Lucas continued to make soft, happy sounds, blissfully unaware that his future was being decided over coffee and pastries. A united front, Adrian repeated slowly. What exactly does that mean? Marisol's fingers traced the rim of her untouched latte, a nervous habit Adrian remembered from their early dating days. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along. But your mother's lawyers made it very clear that they're going to paint me as an unstable single mother, who's keeping a child from his wealthy, established father out of spite, which is complete bullshit, Adrian said with more vehemence than he'd intended. Several nearby customers glanced their way and he lowered his voice. You're an incredible mother. Anyone can see that. Can they? Marisol's green eyes were filled with uncertainty. Because I've been wondering if she's right. If I've been selfish keeping Lucas from you. If my hurt and anger have made me into exactly the kind of person she's accusing me of being. Adrian leaned forward, desperate to close the distance between them. Marisol, no. You protected our son when I was too proud and stupid to deserve him. Everything you did was right, I'm the one who was wrong. Lucas made a small fussing sound, and Marisol automatically began the gentle swaying motion that seemed to soothe him. The movement was so practiced, so instinctive, that it reminded Adrian of just how much of his son's life he'd already missed. What did her lawyers say exactly? Adrian asked, forcing himself to focus on the immediate threat rather than his own guilt. They claim that Lucas needs stability, structure, and the resources that come with the Wolfe name. They're painting our separation as evidence that neither of us is fit to make decisions about his welfare, and that his grandmother would be a more appropriate guardian, until we can prove otherwise. Adrian's hands clenched into fists on the small cafe table. She's using our son as a weapon to control both of us. She can't stand the thought that we might reconcile and cut her out of the decision-making process. Can we? The question came out so quietly Adrian almost missed it. Can we what? Reconcile. Marisol's voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of the word seemed to fill the entire cafe. Not romantically. I'm not ready for that, and I don't know if I ever will be. But can we find a way to be partners in raising Lucas? Can we trust each other enough to present that united front? Adrian felt something shift in his chest, a cautious hope that he didn't dare examine too closely. I want to try. God, Marisol, I want to try more than anything. But I need to know what you need from me. What would make you feel safe enough to trust me with that? Marisol was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Lucas's face as he dozed peacefully in his carrier. Transparency, she said finally. Complete honesty about everything. No more secrets, no more assumptions, no more letting other people influence our decisions about our family. Done, Adrian said immediately. And boundaries with your mother. Real ones, not just words. If we're going to co-parent Lucas, Eleanor doesn't get a vote. She doesn't get to manipulate or intimidate or bribe her way into our decisions. Adrian nodded, though the thought of completely cutting his mother out of his life was more daunting than he wanted to admit. Eleanor Wolfe had been his primary advisor for 41 years, and breaking that pattern would require fundamental changes he wasn't sure he was capable of making. There's more, Marisol continued. I need to see that you've actually changed, not just that you want to change. I need to see you prioritize Lucas over work, over money, over everything else that used to consume your life. What would that look like? I don't know yet, Marisol admitted, but I'll know it when I see it, or when I don't. Lucas stirred in his carrier, blinking those serious gray eyes as he woke from his brief nap. Immediately, both parents focused on him with the intensity of scientists studying a rare specimen. Adrian found himself cataloging every expression, every movement, trying to memorize details he should have been learning for months. "He's going to need a bottle soon," Marisol observed, checking her phone for the time. "I usually feed him around now. Can I?" Adrian hesitated, then forged ahead. "Can I help? I know I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to learn." Marisol studied his face for a moment as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "There's a bottle in the diaper bag. It just needs to be warmed." Adrian stood immediately, grateful for something concrete he could do. "I'll ask the barista if they can warm it." "Room temperature is fine," Marisol called after him as he headed to the counter. "He's not picky." The purple-haired barista looked amused as Adrian explained what he needed, but she was helpful, warming the bottle in a small pot of hot water while Adrian waited nervously. He felt like he was preparing for the most important business presentation of his life, except the stakes were infinitely higher. When he returned to the table, Marisol was unstrapping Lucas from his carrier, and the baby was making increasingly insistent, hungry sounds. Adrian watched, mesmerized, as she lifted their son with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. "Here," she said, holding Lucas out to him. "Support his head and keep him upright." Adrian's hands were shaking slightly as he took his son, but Lucas settled against him with surprising ease. The baby looked up at him with those penetrating gray eyes, and Adrian felt the same overwhelming rush of love and protectiveness he'd experienced in the law firm. "Now the bottle," Marisol instructed, handing it to him. "Touch it to his lips first. He'll open his mouth when he's ready." Adrian followed her instructions, amazed when Lucas immediately latched onto the bottle and began drinking with enthusiastic gulps. The simple act of feeding his son felt monumental, like he was finally doing something right after months of everything wrong. "You're a natural," Marisol said softly, and there was something in her voice, surprise maybe, or cautious approval. "He makes it easy," Adrian replied, unable to take his eyes off Lucas's face. "He's perfect, Marisol. You did an incredible job with him. We made him together," she pointed out. "The good parts of him come from both of us." They sat in comfortable silence while Lucas finished his bottle, and Adrian found himself thinking that this was what he'd been missing. Not just the milestones and the big moments, but the quiet, everyday intimacy of caring for their child together. The way Marisol anticipated Lucas's needs, the way she watched Adrian feed him with a mixture of protectiveness and hope, the way their son seemed completely content to be held by his father. "Marisol," Adrian said quietly, "what if we didn't just present a united front? What if we actually tried to build something real? Not a romantic relationship, I understand that's off the table, but a real partnership, a family that doesn't look traditional but works for all three of us." Marisol was quiet for so long that Adrian began to think he'd overstepped. Then Lucas finished his bottle and made a small, satisfied sound, and she smiled. The first genuine smile Adrian had seen from her since she'd walked into that law firm. "I'd like that," she said simply, "but there are conditions." "Name them." "You move to Brooklyn. Not to some luxury high-rise, but somewhere normal. Somewhere Lucas can have a regular childhood without bodyguards and drivers and all the trappings that come with being a wolf heir." Adrian's first instinct was to negotiate, to explain why that wouldn't work with his lifestyle and responsibilities. Then he looked down at his son, who was gazing up at him with complete trust, and realized that his old life wasn't worth preserving if it meant losing this. "Okay," he said. "What else?" "You learn to change diapers, give baths, handle middle-of-the-night feedings. You don't get to be the fun weekend dad while I handle all the hard parts." "I want to handle the hard parts," Adrian said earnestly. "I want all of it." Marisol nodded slowly, and Adrian could see her mentally checking off items on some invisible list. "And if you ever choose to believe someone else's version of the truth over mine again, if you let your mother or anyone else manipulate you into doubting me, then we're done. Permanently." The condition hit him like a physical blow because he knew he deserved it. "I understand. Do you?" Marisol's green eyes were intense, searching. "Because I can't go through that again, Adrian. I won't survive having my heart broken by the same man twice." Adrian met her gaze steadily, Lucas warm and solid in his arms, and made the most important promise of his life. "I will never give you reason to doubt my trust in you again. That's not just a promise. It's a vow." Marisol studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we have work to do, because your mother is expecting an answer to her custody petition by the end of the week." 3 days later, Adrian stood outside the imposing glass doors of Eleanor Wolf's penthouse office, steel and resolve coursing through his veins. He'd spent 72 hours apartment hunting in Brooklyn, learning to change diapers under Marisol's patient instruction, and preparing for this moment. The conversation that would either free his family or destroy any chance they had of building something real together. His reflection in the elevator's polished chrome showed a man transformed. Gone was the perfectly tailored Armani suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His hair, usually styled to corporate perfection, was slightly disheveled from the morning he'd spent playing with Lucas on Marisol's living room floor. He looked younger, more human, and he felt more like himself than he had in years. The elevator opened into Eleanor's domain, a testament to old money and older power. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across Persian rugs worth more than most people's houses, while oil paintings of long-dead wolf ancestors gazed down with disapproving expressions that had haunted Adrian's childhood. "Adrian, darling." Eleanor's voice carried across the marble foyer before he could see her. She emerged from her study like a queen holding court, every silver hair perfectly in place, her St. John suit immaculate despite the early hour. At 68, Eleanor Wolfe was still a formidable woman, though Adrian was finally beginning to see the calculation behind her maternal facade. "Mother." His greeting was cool, formal, a far cry from the respectful deference she was accustomed to receiving. Eleanor's sharp blue eyes, so different from Adrian's gray ones, swept over his appearance with barely concealed distaste. "You look," she paused, searching for a diplomatic word, "casual. I trust this meeting means you've come to your senses about that custody arrangement." "I have," Adrian said, walking past her into the study where he'd spent countless hours as a child, being lectured about responsibility, family legacy, and the dangers of trusting the wrong people, but probably not in the way you're expecting. The study was a shrine to Wolfe family power, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive mahogany desk that had belonged to Adrian's great-grandfather, and photographs documenting generations of business triumphs. It was here that Eleanor had shaped Adrian's worldview, teaching him to see relationships as transactions and love as a luxury the wealthy couldn't afford. "Sit," Eleanor commanded, settling behind the imposing desk like a general preparing for battle. "We need to discuss your son's future. His name is Lucas," Adrian said, remaining standing, "and his future is exactly what I came here to discuss." Something in his tone made Eleanor pause, her practiced smile faltering slightly. "Adrian, I know you're upset about the custody petition, but you have to understand, I'm only thinking of what's best for the child. That Reed woman has been filling your head with romantic nonsense, but children need stability, structure." "You mean control," Adrian interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't stand the thought that Marisol and I might actually work things out, can you? That we might raise Lucas without your interference." Eleanor's mask slipped entirely, revealing the steel beneath the maternal veneer. "That woman has been nothing but trouble since the day you met her. I warned you she was after the family money, and I was proven right when she started parading around with other men." "Stop." The word exploded from Adrian with enough force to rattle the crystal paperweights on Eleanor's desk. "Just stop. Marcus is gay, Mother. The man in that photograph you had taken is gay, and Marisol was comforting him because he'd just come out to his family. She was pregnant with my son and trying to support a friend, and you turned it into evidence of infidelity." Eleanor's composed expression didn't waver, but Adrian caught the flicker of something, surprise maybe, or calculation in her eyes. "How was I supposed to know that? The photograph showed what you wanted it to show," Adrian said, finally understanding the full scope of his mother's manipulation. "You've been sabotaging my marriage from the beginning, haven't you? Every doubt you planted, every warning about gold diggers, every suggestion that Marisol wasn't good enough for the family. It was all designed to drive us apart. I was protecting you," Eleanor said, her voice rising for the first time Adrian could remember. "Just like I'm protecting that boy now. Do you really think you can play house with a woman who kept your son from you for 4 months? Do you think she'll ever truly trust you again?" The words hit their intended target, striking the insecurities Adrian had been battling since that first moment in the conference room. For a split second, he felt the old familiar doubt creeping in. Maybe Eleanor was right. Maybe he was being naive. Maybe Marisol was just using Lucas to get back at him. Then he thought of yesterday morning, watching Marisol teach him how to burp Lucas properly, her patience and gentle guidance as he fumbled through his first attempts at fatherhood. He thought of the way she'd smiled when Lucas had fallen asleep on Adrian's chest, the cautious hope in her green eyes when she'd said they had work to do. She kept him from me because I destroyed her trust, Adrian said quietly. Because I believed your lies over her truth. Because I was so terrified of being taken advantage of that I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Adrian, I'm withdrawing from Wolf Investments, he continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. I've accepted an offer from Goldman Sachs. The sale will be final by the end of the month. Eleanor went white, her composure finally cracking completely. You can't be serious. That company is your legacy, your father's life work. That company is a prison, Adrian said firmly. It's kept me tied to your vision of success, your fears, your need to control everything and everyone around you. I'm choosing a different legacy for my son. What legacy? Eleanor's voice was sharp with panic now. Living in some tiny apartment in Brooklyn? Working some mundane job? Raising a child without the advantages that come with the Wolf name? The advantage of having parents who trust each other? The advantage of growing up without bodyguards and board meetings and the constant pressure to prove he's worthy of his inheritance? The advantage of being loved for who he is, not what he represents. Eleanor stood abruptly, her hands flat on the desk as she leaned forward. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Adrian. That woman will never forgive you for what you did. She's using that baby to manipulate you, and you're too blinded by guilt to see it. For a moment, Adrian felt the old pattern trying to reassert itself. Eleanor's voice cutting through his confidence, planting seeds of doubt that had grown into the paranoia that destroyed his marriage. But then he thought of Lucas's tiny hand gripping his finger, of Marisol's quiet strength as she'd navigated single motherhood, of the family they could build if he was brave enough to trust in love instead of fear. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe Marisol will never fully forgive me. Maybe this is all a mistake that will blow up in my face. But you know what? I'd rather fail at trying to be the man my family deserves than succeed at being the man you raised me to be. Eleanor's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, anger, disappointment, and finally something that looked almost like fear. If you do this, if you choose them over family loyalty, over everything I've taught you, then I'll finally be free, Adrian finished. And so will my son. He turned toward the door, done with a conversation that should have happened years ago. Behind him, Eleanor's voice followed, sharp with desperation. The custody petition stands, Adrian. If you think you can cut me out of that boy's life, you're more naive than I thought. I have resources, connections. Adrian paused at the door, looking back at the woman who had shaped so much of his life, and felt something that might have been pity. Actually, Mother, you don't. Not anymore. Because as of this morning, I've transferred a significant portion of my liquid assets into a trust for Lucas's future, one that you have no access to or control over. And the lawyers handling the trust have very specific instructions about protecting him from anyone who might try to use legal manipulation to gain access. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and Adrian realized he'd never seen her truly speechless before. The custody petition will fail, he continued, because Marisol and I are presenting a united front now, and because no judge in New York is going to take a child away from two loving parents just because his grandmother thinks she knows better. You're making an enemy of me, Eleanor said, her voice cold with threat. No, Adrian replied sadly. I'm just finally admitting that we were never really family to begin with. Family doesn't manipulate and control. Family doesn't destroy relationships out of fear. Family trusts and supports and loves unconditionally. He left Eleanor standing in her monument to Wolf family power, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and influence that had once defined Adrian's entire world. As the elevator descended toward the street, he felt lighter than he had in years, as if he was shedding the weight of expectations that had been crushing him since childhood. His phone buzzed with a text from Marisol. Lucas took his first real laugh today. Wish you could have been here to see it. Adrian smiled, typing back quickly. On my way. And Marisol? We're free. I'll explain when I get there. For the first time in over a year, Adrian was heading toward his family instead of running from it. Adrian found Marisol's apartment building with the kind of nervous energy he hadn't felt since his first day of business school. The converted brownstone in Brooklyn Heights was nothing like the gleaming Manhattan towers he was used to. But as he climbed the narrow stairs to her third-floor apartment, he realized how much he preferred the warmth and character of this place over the sterile luxury of his penthouse. Before he could knock, the door opened, revealing Marisol in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked beautiful in that effortless way that had always taken his breath away, but it was the expression on her face, hopeful, nervous, real, that made his chest tighten with emotion. "I saw you from the window," she explained, stepping aside to let him in. "You looked like you were psyching yourself up for something." "The biggest presentation of my life," Adrian admitted, following her into the small but cozy living room. The space was decorated with Marisol's artwork and photos of Lucas, warm throws draped over a comfortable couch that probably cost less than Adrian used to spend on dinner. It felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived in years. Lucas was lying on a colorful playmat in the center of the room, batting at hanging toys with the serious concentration of a scientist conducting important research. When he saw Adrian, his face lit up with what was unmistakably recognition and joy. "There's my boy," Adrian said softly, kneeling beside the playmat. Lucas made excited gurgling sounds and waved his arms, and Adrian felt that same overwhelming rush of love that hit him every time he saw his son. "He's been looking toward the door all morning," Marisol observed, settling onto the couch. "Like he knew you were coming." "Smart kid," Adrian replied, gently stroking Lucas's cheek. "Takes after his mother." The casual compliment seemed to catch Marisol off guard, and Adrian saw a flicker of the old warmth in her green eyes before she looked away. "So," she said, changing the subject, "your text mentioned being free. I take it the conversation with your mother didn't go as she planned." Adrian sat back on his heels, his attention split between Lucas and the woman who held his entire future in her hands. "It went exactly as I planned, actually. Eleanor Wolfe no longer has any power over our family." He told her everything: the sale of the company, the trust fund for Lucas, the way he'd finally seen through his mother's manipulation and chosen love over fear. As he spoke, he watched Marisol's expression shift from cautious hope to amazement, to something that looked dangerously close to pride. "You really sold Wolfe Investments," she said when he finished. "Your father's legacy, everything you worked for." "Everything I was trapped by," Adrian corrected. "Marisol, that company was built on my father's dreams and my mother's fears, but Lucas deserves better. He deserves parents who choose each other and their family over money and power and all the things that don't actually matter." Lucas chose that moment to grab Adrian's finger with both tiny hands, as if agreeing with his father's declaration. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through Adrian's chest, and he found himself grinning like an idiot at his son's achievement. "He's getting stronger," Adrian observed. "Look at that grip. The pediatrician says he's developing ahead of schedule," Marisol replied, and there was something in her voice, a note of sharing, of including Adrian in the details of their son's life, that made his heart race with hope. "I want to be there for the next appointment," Adrian said. "I want to be there for all of them. Every milestone, every doctor's visit, every sleepless night, I want all of it." Marisol was quiet for a moment, watching Adrian play with Lucas with a combination of tenderness and careful evaluation. "There's something I need to tell you," she said finally. "Something I probably should have mentioned before." Adrian's stomach dropped. After everything they'd been through, he wasn't sure he could handle another revelation. "What is it?" "I've been seeing a therapist," Marisol said quietly, "ever since Lucas was born. Dr. Sarah Walsh, Diana's sister, actually. She specializes in helping people rebuild trust after betrayal." The admission hit Adrian like a physical blow, not because he was hurt by it, but because it reminded him of just how much damage he'd caused. "Marisol, let me finish," she said gently. "I've been working through my own issues, the anger, the hurt, the fear that I wasn't enough for you to trust. But I've also been trying to understand your perspective, why you believed what you believed." Adrian was afraid to hope, afraid to read too much into her words. And Dr. Walsh helped me see that trust isn't just something you give or don't give. It's something you build brick by brick, choice by choice. It's something you have to choose to rebuild after it's been broken. Lucas made a happy sound and managed to bring one of his toys to his mouth, a feat that seemed to delight him immensely. Both parents automatically smiled at his accomplishment, and Adrian realized that these small moments of shared joy were what he'd been missing most. "I've been choosing not to trust you," Marisol continued. "Not because you haven't earned it back, but because I was scared. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of making myself vulnerable to someone who had the power to destroy me. You have every right to be scared," Adrian said softly. "I destroyed your faith in me. I don't expect you to just forget that." "I'm not forgetting it," Marisol replied, "but I'm trying to move forward from it. And part of moving forward means being honest about what I need to feel safe." "Tell me," Adrian said immediately. "Whatever it is, I'll do it." Marisol took a deep breath, and Adrian could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to ask. "I need you to go to therapy too," Not couples therapy, I'm not ready for that, but individual therapy, to work through whatever made you so willing to believe the worst about the woman you claim to love. The request was fair, more than fair, but it still made Adrian's chest tighten with anxiety. The idea of sitting in a room with a stranger dissecting his fears and insecurities went against every instinct Eleanor had instilled in him about maintaining privacy and control. I know it's asking a lot, Marisol continued when he didn't respond immediately. The Wolf family doesn't exactly have a reputation for emotional vulnerability. But if we're going to co-parent Lucas, if we're going to be partners in raising him, I need to know that you've done the work to understand why our marriage fell apart. Adrian looked down at his son, who was studying him with those serious gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. The thought of Lucas growing up with the same fears and insecurities that had driven Adrian to destroy his own happiness was unbearable. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. I'll start looking for someone this week. Actually, Marisol said, pulling out her phone, Dr. Walsh gave me the name of someone she recommends. Dr. Marcus Rivera. He specializes in helping men work through trust issues and family of origin trauma. The irony of the name wasn't lost on Adrian. Marcus, like the friend whose innocent hug had been twisted into evidence of betrayal. You've thought of everything. I've had a lot of time to think, Marisol replied simply. 4 months of taking care of a baby alone gives you plenty of opportunity for introspection. Lucas made another happy sound and managed to roll from his back to his side, a movement that sent both parents into delighted applause. The baby looked pleased with himself, as if he'd just accomplished something monumental. He's going to be rolling over completely soon, Marisol observed. They say babies usually do it between 4 and 6 months. Will you? Adrian hesitated, then forged ahead. Will you call me when he does it? I know I don't have the right to ask, but I don't want to miss any more firsts. Something in Marisol's expression softened. You won't miss them. Not anymore. I want you to be here for all of it, Adrian. That's what co-parenting means. The simple statement felt like absolution and promise rolled into one. Adrian reached out without thinking, his hand covering hers where it rested on her knee. The contact sent electricity shooting up his arm, and for a moment the air between them crackled with the same chemistry that had drawn them together 5 years ago. But instead of pulling away, Marisol let her fingers intertwine with his, and they sat in comfortable silence watching their son discover the world one small triumph at a time. I found an apartment, Adrian said eventually, reluctant to break the peaceful moment but needing to share his progress. 2 blocks from here. It's nothing fancy, but it has a view of the promenade and room for Lucas to play when he gets older. You really meant it, Marisol said, and there was wonder in her voice. You're actually doing this. You're choosing to live like a normal person. I'm choosing to live like a father, Adrian corrected, like someone who wants to be present for his family instead of hiding behind money and power and all the things that kept me from being real. Marisol's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. It's going to be hard, you know. Learning to trust each other again. Learning to be partners instead of adversaries. I know, Adrian said, squeezing her hand gently. But I think we're both stronger than we were before. I think maybe we needed to break apart to learn how to build something better. Lucas chose that moment to let out what could only be described as a laugh, a genuine, delighted sound that filled the small apartment with pure joy. Both parents turned to stare at their son in amazement, and Adrian realized that Marisol's text had been right. He had missed Lucas's first real laugh, but he was here for this one, and if he had anything to say about it, he wouldn't miss another moment that mattered. 3 weeks later, Adrian stood in his new apartment, watching the sunrise paint Brooklyn Heights in shades of gold and pink. The space was a far cry from his Manhattan penthouse, hardwood floors that creaked slightly, windows that didn't quite close all the way, and a kitchen where he actually had to cook instead of ordering from 5-star restaurants. But as he sipped coffee from a mug Lucas had knocked over twice during yesterday's visit, Adrian couldn't remember ever feeling more at peace. His phone buzzed with a text from Marisol. Emergency at work. Client presentation moved up. Can you take Lucas for the day? Adrian's pulse quickened, not with anxiety, but with anticipation. In the weeks since their conversation, he'd been spending more time with his son, but always with Marisol nearby, ready to step in when his inexperience showed. This would be the first time she'd trusted him alone with Lucas for more than a few hours. He typed back quickly, "Of course. What do I need to know?" Her response came in a flurry of texts. Detailed feeding schedules, nap times, the location of spare diapers, and emergency contacts. Adrian found himself smiling at her thoroughness. The same attention to detail that had made her such a gifted designer was now focused on ensuring their son's well-being. 20 minutes later, Marisol appeared at his door with Lucas strapped to her chest and a diaper bag that looked like it could supply a small army. She was dressed professionally in a navy blazer and pencil skirt, her honey blonde hair pulled back in the sleek style she wore for important meetings. "You look beautiful," Adrian said before he could stop himself, then immediately felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I mean professional, you look professional, ready to conquer the business world." Marisol's smile was soft, touched with something that might have been affection. "Thank you. And you look—" She paused, taking in his jeans and sweater, the way his hair was slightly mussed from sleep, like a dad. The simple observation hit him with unexpected force. A dad, not a CEO, not an heir to a business empire, not the man his mother had shaped him to be, just a father ready to spend the day caring for his son. "So," Adrian said as Marisol transferred Lucas to his arms, "what's this presentation about?" "A small nonprofit that helps women start their own businesses," Marisol replied, adjusting the diaper bag on Adrian's shoulder. "They need a complete rebrand, and if I get this contract, it could lead to bigger things. It's not glamorous, but it's work that matters." Adrian felt a surge of pride for the woman he'd once been married to, who'd taken a devastating personal setback and transformed it into a career that aligned with her values. "You'll be brilliant. You always are when you're passionate about something." Their eyes met and held for a moment, and Adrian saw something flicker in Marisol's green gaze. Recognition, maybe, of the man who used to believe in her dreams before he'd let fear and suspicion poison everything good between them. "I should go," she said, but she hesitated at the door, her protective instincts clearly warring with her need to trust him. "Are you sure you're ready for this? A whole day is different from a few hours." "We'll be fine," Adrian assured her, though he felt a flutter of nerves. "Lucas and I are going to have an adventure, aren't we, buddy?" As if in response, Lucas made one of his happy, gurgling sounds and grabbed a handful of Adrian's sweater, his tiny fingers surprisingly strong. "Call me if anything," Marisol began. "Marisol," Adrian's voice was gentle but firm, "go show them why they'd be crazy not to hire you. Lucas is safe with me." She nodded, took a deep breath, and kissed Lucas's forehead. For a moment, Adrian thought she might kiss him too, an old habit from their married days, but she caught herself and stepped back. "I'll be back by 6, she said, and then she was gone, leaving Adrian alone with his son for the first time in their lives. The first few hours went surprisingly well. Adrian fed Lucas his bottle without incident, changed 2 diapers with only minor fumbling, and even managed to get him down for his morning nap after 20 minutes of gentle rocking. He was starting to feel confident, even proud of his newfound parenting skills. Then Lucas woke up from his nap screaming, not the gentle fussing Adrian had become accustomed to, but full-throated, red-faced screaming that seemed to echo off the apartment walls. Adrian tried everything, feeding, changing, rocking, walking, singing lullabies in his admittedly terrible voice, but nothing worked. Lucas just continued crying with the persistence of a smoke alarm. "Come on, little man," Adrian pleaded, bouncing his son gently as sweat beaded on his forehead. "What do you need? Tell Daddy what you need." But Lucas just cried harder, and Adrian felt panic begin to creep in. This was exactly the kind of moment Marisol had worried about, the test he couldn't afford to fail. His first instinct was to call her, to admit defeat and prove that he wasn't ready for the responsibility of caring for their son. Instead, he took a deep breath and tried to think rationally. Lucas had been fed, changed, and wasn't running a fever. Maybe he was just overstimulated, or maybe he missed his mother's familiar presence. Adrian remembered Marisol mentioning that Lucas loved music, particularly classical pieces. Moving to his laptop, Adrian pulled up a playlist of Bach's most soothing compositions. As the first notes of Air on the G string filled the apartment, Lucas's crying began to subside, replaced by hiccuping sobs that gradually quieted to sniffles. "There we go," Adrian murmured, swaying gently to the music. "You just wanted some Bach, didn't you? I should have known. You've got sophisticated taste like your mama." Lucas's gray eyes, still wet with tears, fixed on Adrian's face with that intense focus that never failed to amaze him. Slowly, the baby's expression shifted from distress to curiosity, as if he was trying to figure out this man who smelled different from his mother, but held him with the same love and care. "I know I'm not her," Adrian whispered, settling into the rocking chair he'd bought specifically for moments like this. but I'm trying to be the dad you deserve. I'm trying to be better than the man I was before I knew you existed." As if in response, Lucas made a soft cooing sound and his tiny hand found Adrian's finger, gripping it with the trust that Adrian was determined to prove worthy of. They spent the afternoon in comfortable routine, bottles and diaper changes punctuated by long periods of simply sitting together, Adrian telling Lucas about everything and nothing, while classical music played softly in the background. He found himself sharing stories about his own childhood, carefully editing out the loneliness and pressure, while focusing on the few genuinely happy memories he could recall. "Your grandmother isn't going to be part of your life," Adrian said during one of these quiet moments. "Not because I want to keep family away from you, but because I want to protect you from the kind of love that comes with conditions. You're going to grow up knowing that you're enough exactly as you are." Lucas seemed to approve of this plan, settling more comfortably against Adrian's chest as the afternoon light shifted from bright to golden. Around 5 o'clock, Adrian's phone rang. Marisol's name appeared on the screen, and he answered immediately, expecting to hear anxiety or worry in her voice. "How did it go?" she asked, and Adrian could hear car sounds in the background. She was already on her way home. "We're good," Adrian said, looking down at Lucas, who was dozing peacefully in his arms. "There was a rough patch around 2 o'clock, but we figured it out. How was your presentation?" "I got the contract," Marisol said, and Adrian could hear the smile in her voice. "They want me to start next week, but more importantly, you sound different." "Different how?" "Confident, like you actually believe you can do this." Adrian considered her words, realizing she was right. Somewhere between the morning's nervous energy and the afternoon's peaceful routine, something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't just playing at being a father anymore, he was becoming one. "I think I'm starting to," he admitted. "Lucas is an excellent teacher. He gets that from his father," Marisol said softly, and the words carried a warmth that made Adrian's chest tighten with hope. When Marisol arrived 20 minutes later, she found Adrian and Lucas still in the rocking chair, both of them looking completely content. Lucas was awake but peaceful, making soft sounds as he studied the evening light coming through the windows. "There are my boys," she said, and the casual possessiveness in the phrase made Adrian's heart skip a beat. "How do you feel about celebrating your new contract with dinner?" Adrian asked. "I could cook. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. Lucas seems to enjoy watching me attempt domestic activities." Marisol's smile was radiant, free of the careful guardedness that had characterized their interactions for weeks. "I'd like that, but fair warning, I'm a tough critic when it comes to pasta. I'll take my chances," Adrian replied, standing carefully so as not to disturb Lucas. "After today, I'm feeling pretty good about my ability to rise to a challenge." As Marisol settled onto his couch with the ease of someone who belonged there, Adrian realized that he was no longer just hoping for a chance to rebuild their family. He was actually doing it, one small moment of trust at a time. 6 months had passed since that first devastating day in the law firm conference room, and Adrian barely recognized the man he'd become. Gone were the $1,000 suits and the constant pressure to prove his worth through business conquests. In their place was something far more valuable, the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and what mattered most. He stood in his Brooklyn apartment on a crisp October morning, watching Lucas practice sitting up on his playmat, while autumn light streamed through windows that still didn't quite close properly. At 8 months old, his son was a marvel of determination and curiosity, babbling constantly in a language only he understood while working seriously on mastering new skills. The therapy with Dr. Rivera had been harder than Adrian expected. Confronting the fears and insecurities that Eleanor had instilled in him required excavating 30 years of emotional conditioning. But slowly, session by session, he was learning to recognize the difference between love and control, between protection and manipulation. His relationship with Marisol had evolved into something entirely new, not the passionate romance of their early marriage, but something deeper and more solid. They were partners now in the truest sense, sharing the daily joys and challenges of raising Lucas, while carefully rebuilding the foundation of trust between them, which was why the envelope that had been slipped under his door that morning felt like a bomb waiting to explode. Adrian stared at the familiar letterhead, Pearson Associates, and the return address that belonged to his mother's law firm. Eleanor hadn't contacted him since their confrontation 6 months ago, and he'd begun to hope that she'd finally accepted defeat. The sound of his door buzzer interrupted his dark thoughts. Marisol's voice came through the intercom. bright with the energy of someone who'd just dropped Lucas off at his first day of baby swimming class. "It's me," she called. "Did you forget we're supposed to have coffee this morning?" Adrian had indeed forgotten. Their Saturday morning coffee tradition had started a month ago, a time for them to talk about Lucas's development, coordinate schedules, and slowly rebuild their friendship without the pressure of romantic expectations. He buzzed her up, quickly shoving the unopened envelope into a kitchen drawer. Whatever Eleanor had planned, he wouldn't let it poison this moment with Marisol. "How did our little fish take to the water?" Adrian asked as she entered, noting the way her eyes immediately swept the apartment to check on Lucas's well-being even though she knew he was safe. "Like he was born for it," Marisol replied, her face glowing with maternal pride. "He laughed the entire time even when water got in his face. The instructor said she's never seen a baby so fearless in the pool." "He gets that from you," Adrian said, starting the coffee maker they'd chosen together last month, a simple gesture that had felt monumentally significant at the time. Marisol settled onto his couch with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged in his space. Over the past few months, the boundaries between their separate lives had blurred in ways that felt natural rather than forced. She kept spare clothes for Lucas here. He had keys to her apartment for emergency situations. They texted constantly about their son's milestones and often found excuses to spend time together that had nothing to do with childcare schedules. "Adrian," Marisol said softly, and something in her tone made him look up from the coffee cups. "There's something I need to tell you." His stomach dropped, memories of the last time she'd said those words flooding back. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about us, about what we're building here." She paused, seeming to gather courage for whatever she was about to say. "About whether we're ready to try being more than co-parents." The words hit Adrian like lightning, sending electricity shooting through every nerve in his body. For months, he'd been careful not to push, not to assume that the growing intimacy between them meant she was ready to risk her heart again. "Marisol, I'm not talking about jumping back into marriage," she said quickly. "I'm talking about dating. Real dating. Like adults who are choosing to explore whether they can fall in love again instead of just trying to recapture what they lost." Adrian set down the coffee cups with shaking hands, afraid to hope but unable to stop the warmth spreading through his chest. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured because we're getting along better or because of Lucas." "This isn't about pressure," Marisol interrupted. "This is about the fact that I've watched you become the man I always believed you could be. The man who chooses trust over suspicion, who puts family over empire, who learned to change diapers because he wanted to be present for every part of his son's life." She stood up, moving closer to him with the same deliberate grace that had captivated him at that charity gala 5 years ago. "This is about the fact that I'm falling in love with who you are now, not just remembering who you used to be." Adrian's heart was beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I've never stopped loving you," he said roughly. "Not for a single day, even when I was too proud and stupid to deserve you." "I know," Marisol whispered, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. "And that's exactly why I think we might have a chance at building something even better than what we had before." Adrian was about to kiss her, really kiss her for the first time in over a year, when his phone rang. The harsh sound shattered the intimate moment and he saw his mother's number on the display. "Don't answer it," Marisol said immediately, recognizing the change in his expression. "I have to," Adrian replied grimly. "She sent papers this morning. Legal documents that I haven't opened yet, but knowing Eleanor, it's not good news." He answered the call, putting it on speaker so Marisol could hear whatever fresh manipulation his mother had concocted. "Adrian, darling." Eleanor's voice filled the apartment, as cold and calculating as ever. "I assume you've received my little gift by now." "What do you want, Mother?" Adrian asked wearily. "I want you to remember who you really are," Eleanor replied smoothly. "I filed an injunction against your sale of Wolf Investments. My lawyers have found several irregularities in the transaction. Irregularities that will tie up the proceeds in court for years unless you come to your senses." Adrian felt ice form in his veins. "You can't do that. The sale was completed months ago. Money talks, darling, and I have more of it than you do now that you've thrown away your inheritance. The judge who signed the injunction is an old family friend. Goldman Sachs is already nervous about the legal challenges. They're prepared to withdraw their offer if this becomes too complicated." The trap was elegant and vicious, exactly what Adrian should have expected from a woman who'd spent decades perfecting the art of control through financial manipulation. Without the money from the sale, he couldn't maintain his current lifestyle or support Lucas the way he wanted to. He'd be forced to crawl back to Eleanor and accept whatever terms she offered. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Full custody of Lucas, placed in my care while you return to your responsibilities at Wolf Investments. The Reed woman can have supervised visitation rights, assuming she signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement about family business." Adrian felt Marisol stiffen beside him, her face going white with shock and rage. This was Eleanor's endgame, not just destroying their relationship but taking their son entirely. "And if I refuse?" Adrian asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then you'll spend years in court fighting an uphill battle while your assets are frozen, and your reputation is destroyed. I have resources you can't match, Adrian, and I'm prepared to use all of them to protect this family from your temporary insanity." The apartment fell silent except for the sound of Adrian's heart pounding in his ears. This was the moment Eleanor had been building toward, the final test of whether he would choose love or surrender to fear. Adrian looked at Marisol, whose green eyes were filled with the same terror he felt. Then he looked toward the playmat where Lucas had been practicing sitting up just minutes before. Their beautiful, innocent son, who deserved better than to be used as a weapon in his grandmother's war for control. "Adrian?" Eleanor's voice carried a note of triumph. "I'm waiting for your answer." Adrian took a deep breath, reached for Marisol's hand, and made the most important decision of his life. "Go to hell, mother," he said calmly. "We'll see you in court." He hung up the phone and pulled Marisol into his arms, feeling her tremble against his chest as the magnitude of what they were facing sank in. "She can't take him," Marisol whispered. "Adrian, she can't actually take Lucas from us, can she?" "She can try," Adrian said grimly. "But she's forgotten something important." "What?" Adrian tilted Marisol's face up to meet his eyes, seeing strength and determination reflected back at him despite her fear. "We're not the same people we were a year ago. We're not fighting each other anymore, we're fighting for each other. And that makes us stronger than any amount of money she can throw at us." Marisol's smile was fierce and beautiful and completely fearless. "Then let's give her the fight of her life." Adrian kissed her then, pouring a year's worth of love and regret and hope into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we face it together. No more secrets, no more letting other people come between us. Together." Marisol agreed, her voice strong with conviction. From the playmat came the sound of Lucas babbling happily to himself, oblivious to the storm gathering around him but safe in the knowledge that his parents would protect him from anything. And for the first time since Eleanor's call, Adrian smiled. His mother might have money and connections and the ruthlessness that came from decades of getting her own way, but she didn't have what he and Marisol had, the unbreakable bond that came from choosing love over fear, trust over control, and each other over everything else the world might offer. The battle for their family was just beginning, but Adrian had never been more confident about which side would win. 2 years later, the late afternoon sun painted Brooklyn Heights in shades of amber and gold as Adrian pushed Lucas's stroller along the promenade, his son's delighted laughter mixing with the gentle sounds of the East River below. At 2.5, Lucas had inherited his mother's fearless spirit and his father's intense focus, currently demonstrated by his serious concentration on the picture book in his lap. "Daddy bird," Lucas announced, pointing at a seagull with the triumphant air of someone making a groundbreaking scientific discovery. "That's right, buddy. What sound does a bird make?" Adrian asked, slowing the stroller so Lucas could observe the wildlife more carefully. "Tweet, tweet," Lucas declared, then dissolved into giggles at his own cleverness. Adrian's heart swelled with the kind of pure joy he'd never known existed before becoming a father. These daily walks had become sacred time. Just him and his son exploring their neighborhood and building the foundation of trust and communication that Adrian was determined would define their relationship. His phone buzzed with a text from Marisol. "Court ruling came through. We won. Completely. Come home so we can celebrate properly." Adrian's hands shook slightly as he read the message. After 18 months of legal battles, appeals, and depositions that had tested every ounce of strength their rebuilt relationship possessed, it was finally over. Eleanor's custody petition had been not just denied but thoroughly dismissed, with the judge citing frivolous litigation designed to harass rather than protect the child's interests. "Lucas, my man," Adrian said, kneeling beside the stroller so he was at eye level with his son. "How would you feel about going home to see Mama?" "Mama, Mama, Mama," Lucas chanted, clapping his hands with enthusiasm. The walk back to their brownstone, they'd bought it together 6 months ago, a symbol of their commitment to building something permanent, felt like floating. Adrian found himself noticing details with heightened clarity. The way the evening light caught in Lucas's dark curls, the warmth of early autumn air, the solid weight of the house key in his pocket that represented everything he'd fought to protect. As he opened the front door, the smell of Marisol's famous lasagna filled the hallway, along with something else. The warm, lived-in scent of home that no amount of money could buy. "We're home," Adrian called, lifting Lucas from his stroller. "Living room." Marisol's voice carried a note of barely contained excitement. Adrian rounded the corner to find their living room transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, a bottle of champagne sat chilling in an ice bucket, and Marisol stood in the center of it all wearing the emerald green dress from their first anniversary, the one she'd been planning to wear the night he'd destroyed their marriage with his accusations. But it was her expression that stopped him cold. Pure, radiant joy mixed with something that looked almost like mischief. "Mama pretty," Lucas announced, reaching for her with grabby hands. "Thank you, my love," Marisol said, taking Lucas and spinning him around until he shrieked with laughter. "Mama has some very good news to share with her boys." Adrian set down the diaper bag, his eyes taking in the celebration she'd prepared. "I got your text. I can't believe it's really over." "Oh, that's not the only news," Marisol said, her green eyes sparkling with secrets. "The judge didn't just dismiss your mother's petition. She also issued a restraining order preventing Eleanor from any future contact with Lucas without both parents' written consent, and she ordered her to pay our legal fees." Adrian felt a weight he'd been carrying for 18 months finally lift from his shoulders. "She can't hurt us anymore." "She can't hurt us anymore," Marisol confirmed, then added with a grin. "And neither can Goldman Sachs, because guess what arrived in today's mail?" She handed him an envelope with the familiar logo of the investment firm. Inside was a check for the full amount of the Wolf investment sale, plus interest for the time it had been held in escrow. 18 months of legal battles, and we ended up exactly where we wanted to be anyway, Adrian said wonderfully. Financially independent, legally protected, and free from Eleanor's control. "That's still not all the news," Marisol said, and now she was practically vibrating with excitement. Adrian looked at her more carefully, noting the flushed cheeks, the way she was holding Lucas protectively against her chest, the particular glow that he recognized but didn't dare interpret. "Marisol," he said slowly, "please tell me you're not about to say what I think you're about to say." Her smile was radiant, transformative. "I'm pregnant." The words hit Adrian like lightning, sending joy shooting through every nerve in his body. He reached for her and Lucas, pulling them both into his arms as the full magnitude of her announcement sank in. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "We're having another baby. We're having another baby," Marisol confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I found out this morning right before the court ruling came through. Dr. Walsh says I'm about 8 weeks along." Lucas, seemingly sensing the emotional importance of the moment even if he didn't understand it, patted his father's face with gentle hands. "Daddy happy?" "Daddy is so happy," Adrian managed, his voice breaking on the words. "Daddy is the luckiest man in the entire world." They stood there in their living room, surrounded by candlelight and the promise of their future, holding each other and their son while their second child grew safe and protected in Marisol's womb. Adrian thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, wealthy but empty, successful but fundamentally alone, and marveled at the journey that had brought him here. "I have something for you too," he said suddenly, remembering the small box he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Marisol's eyes widened as he pulled out the velvet ring box, and Lucas made interested grabbing motions toward the shiny object. "Adrian," she whispered. "I know we said we'd take things slow," Adrian said, dropping to one knee while still holding Lucas in one arm, a feat that would have been impossible before he'd learned to juggle parenting and romance. "I know we agreed that marriage was something we'd discuss in the future, when we were sure we'd rebuilt everything properly. Adrian, but I don't want to wait anymore," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I don't want our children to grow up thinking their parents were just co-parenting or taking things slow. I want them to grow up seeing what it looks like when two people choose each other every single day, when they fight for each other and trust each other and build something beautiful together." He opened the box, revealing not the massive diamond Eleanor would have approved of, but a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the candlelight like captured starlight. "Marisol Reed, will you marry me? Again? For real this time, with all the wisdom we've earned and all the love we've rebuilt and all the trust we've learned to deserve." Marisol was crying openly now, but her smile could have lit up the entire city. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then kissed her with all the passion and gratitude and hope he'd been storing up for months. Lucas, trapped between his parents but clearly delighted by their happiness, added his own contribution to the moment by shouting, "Yay!" at the top of his lungs. When they broke apart, all three of them were laughing and crying simultaneously. "So," Marisol said, wiping tears from her cheeks, "when should we do this? Small ceremony? Big wedding? Vegas elopement?" "Actually," Adrian said, "I was thinking we could get married right here. In our home with Lucas as our ring bearer and your parents as witnesses. Nothing fancy, just us and the people who matter most." "What about your mother?" Marisol asked, though there was no real concern in her voice. "What about her?" Adrian replied. "We're not building our family for Eleanor's approval anymore. We're building it for us, for Lucas, for the baby you're carrying. The people who love us will celebrate with us, and the people who don't, well, that's their loss." Marisol's smile was luminous. "I love you, Adrian Wolfe. I love the man you've become. I love the father you are. And I love the future we're building together." "I love you too," Adrian replied, pulling her close again. "I love all of it. The chaos and the joy and the everyday miracles of getting to be your husband and Lucas's father, and this new baby's dad." Lucas, who had been listening to this exchange with the serious attention he brought to all important matters, suddenly piped up with perfect timing, "Love mama, love daddy, love baby." They all burst into laughter at his declaration, and Adrian realized this was what happiness actually felt like, not the hollow satisfaction of business victories or the temporary high of material acquisition, but this warm, complicated, perfectly imperfect love that filled every corner of his heart and made everything else seem insignificant by comparison. As the evening sun set over Brooklyn Heights, painting their living room in shades of gold and promise, Adrian held his family close and marveled at the man he'd become. He'd lost an empire but gained a kingdom. He'd given up control but found freedom. He'd risked everything for love and discovered that love, when it was real and fought for and treasured, was the only wealth that actually mattered. Outside, the city hummed with the lives of millions of people, but inside their small brownstone, three people who would soon be four had created something that felt like the center of the universe. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Wolfe was exactly where he belonged. Would you have had the courage to choose love over everything you thought defined you? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.